Imagine for a moment the silence of a room where betrayal is not shouted but whispered, a place where cruelty wears the mask of kindness, and harm is inflicted not with fists, but with words that slice deeper than any blade. Behind closed doors, in the unseen corners of life where no one watches, no one suspects, and no one believes you, there is a unique kind of pain reserved for those who are wounded in secret. When the world sees smiles and kind gestures, but you carry the memory of cold words and wicked eyes, you begin to question your own reality. How can someone be praised publicly and yet pierce you privately? How can those who wear masks of virtue walk away celebrated, while your truth rots in the shadows? You want to scream, but your voice trembles under the weight of disbelief. You want to fight, but you're already tired from the battles no one saw, and so you sit with your silence. You wear your wounds beneath your clothes, wrapped in composure, hiding the bruises that didn't come from a slap, but from manipulation, gaslighting, and betrayal. People look at them and call them kind, wise, spiritual, while you sit quietly, wondering if anyone will ever see what really happened. You start to feel invisible, forgotten, invalidated. But what if I told you that God never needed a courtroom to bring justice? That He saw the closed door, the fake smile, the text deleted before anyone else could read it? What if the silence you've been forced to keep is the very thing God will use to write your redemption? While they covered their wickedness in performance, God was taking notes in eternity. Every tear you cried behind a locked door was a prayer that reached His throne. Every injustice whispered in secret became a thunderclap in heaven. You may have been hurt in silence, but God is not silent about your pain. The truth they buried will rise. The lies they used to protect themselves will collapse under their own weight. Because karma, divine justice, call it what you will, moves slow, but it never forgets. And when God moves, He doesn't need your enemies to confess. He will let their own actions expose them, not in private, but publicly, as they once humiliated you in secret. Their downfall will be broadcast in plain sight. Pause here. Let this truth settle in your heart. Because when God restores, He doesn't just heal. He reveals the truth, loudly, in front of the same crowd that once clapped for the lie. Let us now walk into the deep truths of what this speech means for those who have been hurt, silenced, and misrepresented, yet still chosen by God for a greater purpose. God saw the betrayal behind the smiles. He never needed an audience to validate your pain. There's a comfort that only comes when you understand that God doesn't need witnesses to believe your story. The betrayal you faced was not missed, skipped, or excused just because no one else saw it. When someone hurts you in silence, behind a closed door, behind carefully curated smiles, behind gestures that appear kind to everyone else, there's a devastating isolation that settles in. It's not just the act of being heard. It's the experience of being doubted, of knowing that if you ever told your truth, you might be called dramatic, bitter, or even mentally unstable. And yet, God saw it all. He saw the shift in their tone when the door closed. He saw the text messages you weren't supposed to see. He heard the laughter that was a little too loud after your tears fell. While they posed as saints in front of others, God was present in the room where they were cruel, manipulative, and heartless. God doesn't see as man sees. People look at appearance, but God looks directly at the heart. And the heart He saw was full of deceit, not goodness, performance, not pure. You might have felt invalidated because no one clapped for your pain. No one applauded you for surviving the manipulation, the silent blame games, or the passive-aggressive attacks. You might have stayed silent because speaking would have cost you your reputation, your peace, or your sanity. But while the world overlooked you, heaven was paying close attention. God was writing down the moments you were left alone, the moments your character was questioned by those who hid behind charm and charisma. And what the world calls keeping the peace, God sometimes calls enabling injustice. Understand this: God's justice doesn't require public approval. It doesn't depend on a majority vote or a panel of spectators. His justice begins in truth, and truth doesn't need a crowd. The validation you've been waiting for might never come from people, but it already exists in God's memory. You don't have to prove that you were mistreated. You don't have to drag your pain into the light to convince others, because what God sees, He will act upon. And when He chooses to reveal it, no mask will remain, no lie will hold, and no false version of the story will stand. You might be feeling like your silence has made you look weak, but in God's eyes, your restraint was your strength. Your refusal to retaliate wasn't foolish. It was faithful. And the same God who let Joseph sit in prison for a crime he didn't commit is the God who raised him to a throne so high that even his accusers had to bow. There is power in knowing God saw it all. And there is rest in knowing He is the only one who truly needs to. Closed doors do not hide sin from heaven, only from men. It's easy to believe that what happens in private stays hidden forever. That's how those who hurt you behind closed doors justify their actions. They think if no one sees it, no one will question it. They trust the lock on the door more than the all-seeing eye of God. But closed doors are not barriers to heaven. They might shield you from earthly support, but they never shield sin from divine justice. Behind that locked room where you were humiliated, God stood like a silent observer. He saw the manipulation that twisted your intentions. He saw the way they turned your kindness into a tool for their ego. He saw the rage they reserved for you in private, only to put on a calm and collected face in front of others. And while you trembled in the shadow of their hypocrisy, God stood as your witness, not just watching, but remembering. You see, closed doors are a temporary illusion. They create a false sense of safety for those who use them to harm others. They believe their secrets are safe. But God is not blind to injustice, just because it's whispered. In fact, He has always been the God who hears what no one else hears. He heard Cain's unspoken jealousy before Abel ever fell. He heard Sarah's hidden laughter. He even hears the thoughts that form before that. Do you really think a wooden door or a smiling photo hides anything from Him? For you, that door represented isolation. You probably cried there. You probably begged God for rescue while they walked out and played the victim. You might have sat in that room, crushed, wondering how someone could act so righteous while being so ruthless. But those tears you shed in private were not wasted. Heaven bottled each one. They were not a sign of weakness. They were evidence submitted before the highest court, God's throne. The day will come when the very door they use to hide their evil becomes the same place God uses to expose it. He doesn't forget. He doesn't ignore. And most importantly, He doesn't stay silent forever. He might give them time to repent, but if they don't, the truth will surface like a wave, unstoppable, undeniable, uncontainable. While people trust walls, locks, and silence, you trust in a God who sees through them all. Don't let the silence convince you that justice will never come. It's already coming. And when it does, it won't knock. It will break down the door they used to hide behind, because in the end, what's done in secret is always revealed. Not just to vindicate the victim, but to bring light to the darkness others tried so hard to conceal. Divine justice operates on heaven's clock, not man's applause. There is a sacred frustration that lives in the heart of someone who has been wronged and still waits for justice. It is the ache of seeing the wicked succeed while you're still trying to catch your breath. It is the sting of watching someone who caused you pain walk freely, praised by the same people who would condemn you if only they knew the truth. And yet, through that pain, God whispers a timeless reminder. His justice is never delayed, it's only perfectly timed. We live in a world obsessed with instant gratification. We want resolution now. We want exposure now. We want karma to arrive in the same hour that pain was delivered. But heaven doesn't function by the timelines of men. Divine justice is not rushed, because it is precise. What we see as delay, God calls preparation. While you're praying for immediate vindication, He's preparing a stage where every lie will collapse under the weight of truth. And when He moves, it's not temporary. His justice doesn't just satisfy the moment. It rewrites destinies. You may feel discouraged because the people who hurt you seem untouched. They still smile, they still gain followers, they still sit at the tables of influence. And while you sit in silence, trying to heal from what no one else even believes happened, it feels like injustice has won. But in God's courtroom, the trial isn't rushed for entertainment. It's orchestrated for truth. He lets seasons pass not because He has forgotten, but because exposure without collapse is just noise. God waits until their pride is high, their image is untouchable, their lies are deeply rooted. So when He strikes, the fall is undeniable. The applause of men is fleeting. It can be bought, it can be manipulated. But God's justice isn't swayed by popularity or performance. He doesn't need headlines. He doesn't require public sympathy. He doesn't even need your enemies to admit what they did. Because He sees the heart, and what is hidden from people is crystal clear to Him. The applause they enjoy now is only the prelude to the silence that will follow when the truth is revealed. And for you, don't measure your healing or your value by how fast justice comes. Your restoration is not dependent on their downfall. Your peace isn't waiting for karma to finish its course. Trust that heaven's clock is still ticking, quietly, precisely, faithfully. God is never early and He is never late. His timing is not for your entertainment, it's for your elevation. The ones who used deception will fall by the very lies they told. Deception is a temporary power. It creates illusions, yes. It can convince others, manipulate narratives, even paint saints out of sinners. But what it cannot do, what it never has the strength to do, is endure. Lies are like spider webs, intricate, sticky, convincing, but fragile. The more someone tries to build upon them, the more tangled they become. And eventually they collapse under the weight of their own falsehood. The people who hurt you behind closed doors likely depended on deception. They crafted stories. They rehearsed justifications. They perfected their tone, curated their image, and made sure the world saw only what they wanted to reveal. But every word they spoke that twisted the truth, every act of manipulation, every conversation used to paint you as the villain, was a brick in the prison they were building for themselves. Lies always come with a cost. In the beginning, they feel like a shield, protecting the liar, distancing them from accountability. But over time, that same shield becomes a wall, isolating them from truth, from peace, and eventually from favor. God has a way of letting liars run just far enough to believe they've won, only to let the trap they laid for someone else become the one they fall into themselves. When God exposes a lie, He does so in layers. He allows tension to build. He allows the liar to grow more confident, more reckless, more invested in their own version of the story. And then He pulls one thread, just one, and suddenly the story unravels. People start asking questions. The mask begins to crack. The inconsistencies rise to the surface. What was once solid begins to shake, and the liar has no place left to hide. And you won't have to force anything. You won't have to scream, beg, or prove your innocence, because the truth has a way of defending itself when the time is right. God doesn't just expose the lies, they do. The very stories they use to harm you become the evidence that convicts them. The deception they use to protect themselves becomes the weapon that turns against them. So be patient. The truth doesn't rot, it waits. It waits for the perfect moment to rise, and when it does, it shines with a light so powerful that even the blind can see. Lies might win the moment, but they never win the war. Those who built their reputation on deception are already walking toward a fall, and it won't be subtle, because when God decides to make the truth known, He does it in a way that even those who defended the lie will have no choice but to see it for what it is. Your silence is not weakness, it is the seedbed of your vindication. In a world where noise often wins, silence is mistaken for surrender. When you chose not to retaliate, when you chose not to expose them, when you let them walk away with the last word while your heart carried the weight of the truth. You might have looked weak in the eyes of others, but in the eyes of heaven, that silence was not weakness. It was strength clothed in restraint. It was faith wrapped in patience. And most importantly, it was a seed buried deep, growing quietly, preparing to bear the fruit of your vindication. God has always honored those who hold their peace when they could have exploded. Your silence was not permission. It was not ignorance. It was not indifference. It was you placing your case in the hands of the only judge who truly matters. You didn't fight back because you trusted that God fights differently. You didn't scream the truth because you trusted that God speaks louder. You didn't demand justice because you believed that God writes better endings than anything your words could create. People may have laughed at you for staying quiet. They may have called you naive, weak, or too kind for your own good. But silence isn't cowardice. It's wisdom. It's refusing to stoop to the level of your accuser. It's stepping back so God can step in. And while others assumed you were losing the battle, heaven was already preparing the victory. Think about every tear you didn't let them see, every insult you absorbed without retaliation, every moment you were misunderstood, misrepresented, and mislabeled. Those moments were not wasted. They were divine investments. While they thought they were winning, you were building. And what you were building was credibility with heaven, strength in your spirit, and depth in your soul. You weren't losing. You were being refined. God never misses a moment of dignity. When you held your tongue, He took note. When you turned the other cheek, He counted it. And when you chose the high road, while they took the easy one, He marked that day as the beginning of their unraveling. Because silence in the face of injustice is not emptiness. It is trust. Trust that truth will rise. Trust that light will break in. Trust that the one who was silent before Pilate is the same one who now stands beside you. And when God vindicates, He doesn't whisper it in secret. He prepares a table before your enemies. He lifts your head in front of those who mocked you. He lets your silence become the very thing that silences others. Because nothing speaks louder than a life that was hurt in secret but healed in public. Nothing crushes lies more than a truth that never needed to shout. Your silence is not your shame. It is your story in progress. And when the final chapter is written, it will be proof that dignity wins, grace prevails, and God always justifies those who wait on Him. Point 6. When God exposes truth, it becomes undeniable. No defense can cover it. There's a difference between man's exposure and God's revelation. When people try to bring the truth to light, it can be dismissed, twisted, or ignored. But when God does it, it cannot be buried again. His light isn't like a spotlight, it's like the sun. It rises slowly, then suddenly it's everywhere. And when He decides that it's time for truth to come forward, No defense, no manipulation, no crafted narrative will be enough to cover it. Those who hurt you behind closed doors might have built an entire life on lies. They may have fooled friends, family, even spiritual communities. They might have written a version of events that makes them look like the victim and you like the problem. But there comes a moment when God says enough, and when He speaks that word, the masks fall. The lies crumble, and truth walks in like a fire no one can extinguish. There is a power in divine exposure. It doesn't just show what happened, it reveals who someone really is. That's what makes it undeniable. People can argue against facts. They can question your story. But they cannot stand against the presence of God revealing a heart. When the Spirit of truth begins to move, He reveals not just the incident, but the pattern, the intention, the corruption beneath the performance. He doesn't just show the fruit, He exposes the root. This is why you don't need to beg people to believe you. You don't need to launch a campaign to clear your name. You don't have to gather evidence or win people to your side. Because when God exposes, He removes all shadows. And when the truth comes in His timing, it speaks for itself, loudly, clearly, irrefutably. Imagine the courtroom of heaven opening, not with noise, but with clarity. Imagine those who lied about you standing in the light of their own contradictions. Imagine the ones who smiled publicly, but cursed you privately, suddenly finding that their own words, their own actions, their own cruelty is what God uses to unravel them. That is the exposure that comes from heaven, not motivated by vengeance, but by justice, not by your bitterness, but by God's holiness. And the most powerful part? You won't even have to move. You won't even have to say, "I told you so," because the same people who believed the lie will come to you and say, "I see it now." The same audience that clapped for their performance will fall silent when the truth is revealed. Not because you spoke, but because God did. Let them talk. Let them build their version of the story. Let them enjoy the attention, the support, the illusion, because when God decides the moment has come, the truth will not knock. It will kick the door open, and it will not leave until every lie is stripped, every heart is pierced, and every soul sees what they tried so hard to hide. Public elevation always follows private suffering. When the suffering is righteous, there is a sacred pattern woven throughout Scripture and echoed in the lives of the faithful. Those who suffer in secret are the very ones God chooses to elevate in public. But not just any suffering, righteous suffering. The kind where you held your tongue when you had every reason to speak. The kind where you kept showing up with grace even after betrayal. The kind where your character was attacked, but you chose integrity over revenge. That is the soil in which God plants elevation. When you suffer quietly, the world assumes your silence is a sign of defeat. But what they fail to realize is that God is not just watching your suffering, He's preparing your stage. Every tear you shed, every wound you carried in silence, every time you chose prayer instead of retaliation, those were moments when heaven leaned in. Those weren't moments of failure, they were moments of faith. And faith always attracts the favor of God. Look through the pages of Scripture, and you'll find this divine principle everywhere. Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused and forgotten in prison. His suffering was private, prolonged and undeserved. But when God decided it was time, Joseph didn't just come out of prison. He went straight to the palace. And what did he say to the very brothers who betrayed him? "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." That is the voice of someone who understands righteous suffering and public elevation. David was anointed king as a young shepherd boy, but he wasn't handed the throne right away. He spent years running, hiding, weeping, misunderstood and mistreated. The same people who once sang his praises turned against him. But in the quiet caves of suffering, God was preparing his crown. When his time came, David didn't rise with bitterness. He rose with brokenness, transformed into strength. And his reign was not built on revenge, but on reverence. You may feel today like your suffering is hidden. You may feel like your obedience, your faithfulness, your restraint have all been ignored, but rest in this truth. God never allows righteous suffering to end in silence. He turns your pain into a platform, your struggle into a spotlight, not to make you boastful, but to make his glory known through your story. And when God elevates you, he doesn't do it in secret. He prepares a table in the presence of your enemies. He lets those who doubted you witness the miracle. He turns the whispers of your past into the testimony of your future. Not because you fought your way there, but because you let him carry you. So, don't curse the cave. Don't despise the season of silence, because the very place where you wept will be the ground where you rise, and the ones who mocked your pain will be forced to witness your promise. For God does not forget those who suffered righteously. He crowns them publicly. They hurt you behind closed doors. They assumed that secrecy was power, that silence was safety, that deception would protect them forever. But they forgot something crucial. God was there too. While they were whispering lies, heaven was listening. While they were painting themselves as saints, God saw their stained intentions. You may have been invisible to man, but you were never invisible to God. And now, the season is shifting. What was done in secret will be revealed in the open. The same closed doors they used to hide behind will now swing open to expose the truth. Not because you forced it, not because you fought for revenge, but because you trusted the one who sees all, knows all, and never lets injustice go unanswered. Your silence was not your defeat, it was your offering. Your pain was not your prison, it was your preparation. And your tears were not wasted, they were seeds, watering the soil for a harvest of vindication. The God who stood beside you in the shadows is now stepping forward to shine light on the truth. And when he moves, the very ones who hurt you in private will be humbled in public. So stand still, keep your peace, and lift your head, because your story is not ending in betrayal. It is rising in redemption. God will publicly let karma expose their truth, and you, the one they tried to silence, will rise with a voice so strong, not even shame can touch it anymore.